Hey, greetings, everyone. It's Naomi Wolf of Daily Clout, and we are here with one of our favorite guests and one of our favorite sponsors, representative, Phillip Patrick of Birch Gold Group. In fact, he is Birch Gold Group's primary spokesman and educator. He was born in London and earned a politics and international relations degree at the prestigious University of Reading in Berkshire, England. Growing up in London, he saw the risk of government overreach and socialist policies firsthand, spent years as a private wealth manager at Citigroup on Lombard Street, the Wall Street of London, joined Birch Gold as precious metals specialist in 2012, and has been with them ever since. In 2021, he became an American citizen, which is so awesome. Phil spends much of his time leading Birch Gold's team of precious metals specialists, working with them to understand the current state of the global economy and how macroeconomic factors change the lives of everyday Americans. And I always say at the end of reading your very distinguished bio that one reason I love talking to you, and one reason our audience loves hearing from you, is that we are not specialists, most of us. We are lay people and not economists. And it's so common that economics and sort of what to do with our money and monetary policy is incredibly incomprehensible, and you make it so clear and so fascinating. So let's just jump right in. As I mentioned before the cameras started rolling or the video started recording, new administration since I last spoke with you. Very huge implications economically. I'm just going to throw it over to you, and I want to know, what is your view of what has changed for consumers, for people trying to save, trying to maximize their savings, but just trying to understand the economy in the monetary policy of the Biden administration outgoing versus what you're anticipating coming in?
Look, I'm as excited as I think you are, and I think certainly from an economic standpoint, it's a very important change at a very crucial time. The team he's assembled, particularly the Treasury Secretary pick, Scott Bessent, I think is probably the man to lead the Treasury. But just across the board, Doge is exciting me as well, looking at how we can rein in spending, become more efficient. So it's exciting to say the least. The fundamentals that we discussed, weeks ago, though, they are still the same today, and the administration has a very tough job in front of them. Curbing the spending, I think, is going to be a priority. I think it's going to be difficult to achieve at the levels necessary. I mean, to balance the budget, we'll need to cut $2 trillion. It's going to be a tough job to achieve, I think. But people think spending is negative. It's not negative. Wasteful spending is negative.
Did you know that there is nearly $1 trillion of infrastructure and pandemic funds that have yet to be spent? That's right. There is a massive amount of money that the lame duck Biden administration is pushing hard to spend in their last remaining months. If the president is able to push these funds out, we could see another prolonged inflation surge, just like during the COVID years. And I'm sure you remember the terrible effects that high prices had on most Americans. But there is a way out. A surge in prices can be beaten. A gold IRA from Birch Gold Group is the ultimate inflation hedge for your savings in such uncertain times as these. To see how to protect your IRA or 401k, you should get your free info kit on gold by texting the word Daily Clout to 989898. Birch Gold makes it seamless to roll over your retirement account while preserving its tax advantage status. Don't wait for the president's spending spree to tank the dollar further. Protect your financial future now. Text Daily Clout to the number 989898 for your free info kit from Birch Gold.
Productive spending can be positive. You can spend in a way that generates GDP, and I think that's the approach the administration will take. So I think we'll continue to run deficits, but the hope is they can lay the groundwork, sow the seeds for a booming economy and for an increase in GDP in the future. That's the hope.
Wow. I mean, thank you. I guess I have two follow-up questions to what you just said. Absolutely, most people think, especially if they're on the conservative or libertarian side, that deficit spending is always bad. But you just said, and that balancing the budget is, the dream. You just said that the right kind of deficit spending, or spending that will lead to a deficit or not get rid of the deficit, is good. This is kind of a shock to me because I've never heard that before from, anyone, well, on either side of the aisle. Explain that more, please. Why do you think that?
You can spend in a positive manner. Look at some of the things the Biden administration was spending on bee-friendly highways and, just bonkers things. You can spend on infrastructure. You can spend in ways that generate positive economic, GDP growth. That's what this administration has vowed to do. Listen, running budget surpluses is going to be very difficult, right? We've got a $2 trillion deficit currently. If they remove all discretionary spending, 100% of discretionary spending, the budget would just be balanced, right? So essentially, in order to balance, the Republicans would have to spend nothing, right, outside of non-discretionary. There's not too many cuts that they're talking about when it comes to non-discretionary spending. There's not a huge amount to cut there. So to run a surplus or to balance the budget, the Republicans would have to not spend. How do you get out of a deficit problem? There's two ways to do it. One is austerity, right? You raise taxes, you increase the money coming in, you make cutbacks, you tighten the belt buckle, right? It's a tough way to get through it. The other way to get through it is growth, right? And growth means spending, right? And when we look at who we've elected to the White House, it's not an austerity guy, it's a growth guy, right? Trump is a growth guy. So the hope is that they're going to spend more productively, and I believe that they can, but it is a very tough task. For some context, the gamble here is that debt growth, or the GDP growth rather, outpaces debt growth. Oh. That's going to be a tough thing to manage. Since the 70s, annual debt growth has averaged 8.5% a year. GDP inflation adjusted about 3% a year. So to balance it with growth, Trump would have to triple the GDP of the United States in 4 years, which, like I say, is going to be a tough task. So the hope is they build a manufacturing base in the longer term.
Yeah, we spoke about that in our last conversation, the long-term value of building our manufacturing base, but how challenging it is politically because it takes, effort now for benefits, some years from now. Right. Well, let me think about what you just said. It's really interesting. I mean, you're right. Spending millions or billions on DEI policies, for instance, which are, illegal according to the Civil Rights Act, or as you mentioned, bee-friendly programs or any number of other kind of fungible activities, right, that we don't need for our well-being. I can see that doesn't generate anything except wealth transfer to NGOs, right, which arguably keep people employed. But how is investing, say, in infrastructure, which I can clearly see leads to people being hired to build the road, right? How is that better than hiring a bunch of social workers to make sure that your child uses the right pronouns?
Because, look, first of all, it's about efficiency, right? If you're working on infrastructure, suddenly things move across the country faster, costs reduce, and profitability increases. So it's not just about hiring, it's also about efficiency. So there's lots of ways to improve through spending. Like I said, Trump's talking about beefing up our manufacturing base. That's going to cost money. It's going to take time, but longer term, it will generate economic output. So like I said, you can spend in many productive ways. The big problem with the Biden administration is they just didn't know how to spend money. And they were trying to put...
Let me ask a horrible question. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, please.
I mean, all those billions that went to Ukraine, arguably, and I would never want them to, right? I'm not saying it's a good idea for many reasons, but arguably they keep people employed at Boeing and Raytheon in the United States, right?
That's the argument, right? Military industrial complex comes back and benefits us in the United States. That's been the argument that's driven the military industrial complex for decades here in the United States. I would say on a global scale, it's not a good thing. Now we're getting into politics, but that's the economic argument for warring overseas. But I think it comes with political and human consequences, and that's a whole different.
In other words, if we could make the same amount of money or more, I should say the same number of jobs or more, building roads than B-1 bombers. I mean, I guess this is a pretty old argument. It goes back to the Vietnam War, as I recall, from my childhood. I can see the advantage of that. Let me ask one more thing before I turn to my second follow-up question. How does President Trump boost manufacturing? I mean, if we don't have a communist system in which the state builds the manufacturing plants, how does he create a policy that, well, tariffs you discussed last year, but yeah, what else? Or is that it?
Look, tariffs are really going to look. The reason we buy goods from China is because they're cheaper than goods made in the US, right? And that's what's driving consumers. So the way you mitigate that is you put goods from China on par from a cost standpoint with goods from the US, and that will incentivize people longer term to start buying US, and it'll start driving manufacturing back to the United States, and it builds from there. But that's why it's a long-term plan, and that's why it involves short-term pain, because it's the consumer in the US that will pay the prices shorter term. Now, Trump throwing around 100% tariffs, I'd be surprised if he did that. Look, what he does a lot of the time is he uses things like that as a negotiating tool, plants a stake in the ground and works backwards from there. I suspect that's what he's doing there, because 100% tariff on goods from China would cause big problems in the economy.
And when you say 100% tariff on goods from China, you mean something would double in price. If I see a cheap saucepan at Target that costs $9, it'll cost $18. Wow. Sure. That would change. We talked about this a little bit in our last conversation. It was so fascinating to think what would happen to America if all the junk we've become addicted to became, as expensive as the good stuff that was built here. And do you really believe that capitalism works so efficiently that if the junk from China became expensive or cost prohibitive, that manufacturing plants to rival the junk from China would open here in the United States? And doesn't that presume a social thing, which is people willing to work, which I know that many employers were complaining for years after the pandemic. I don't know if it's still true that people didn't want to work anymore.
Look, tariffs work. They do. They are very effective. They put tariffs on before in Trump's first administration. They led to a massive increase in factory consumption here in the United States, up 242% since 2019. But as you can see, it took 5 years for that to materialize. So it's a slow, drawn out process. But I think during COVID, we realized part of it was tariffs. Part of it was national security, right? There was periods in time where we thought China was going to invade Taiwan. We wouldn't be able to get any chips. That obviously onshoring domestic chip manufacturing. So there's a number of things, but tariffs are effective at onshoring manufacturing, but it takes time.
Interesting. Boy, what a disastrous set of decisions we have been subjected to. I actually, it ties in with another interview I did recently, Mr. Patrick, with Dr. Kelly Victory, who is in the kind of crisis and, public emergency medicine space. Hey parents, I have an early Christmas and holiday gift for you. We've all been there. 1 minute your child is bouncing off the walls, perfectly healthy, and an hour later, this child is very sick. You feel helpless, and it can turn your plans upside down, especially on vacation. After thousands of customer requests, the wellness company has just launched the Kids Emergency Medical Kit You no longer have to deal with emergency illnesses in a panic. Now you can have 6 critical medications at your fingertips to treat 20 plus illnesses for issues children have, such as strep throat, ear infections, lice, and respiratory illnesses. You can avoid urgent care in hospitals. The Kids Emergency Kit has been hand-selected by the Wellness Company's medical board and includes chewable amoxicillin, dissolvable ivermectin, and an optional EpiPen and more. This also includes a detailed guidebook guiding you step by step in emergencies. Ordering this kit is simple. Only parents can order for their children. Fill out an intake form and you will get a verification call for consent. Then it's delivered to your door. Don't wait till you're in the middle of a crisis and avoid late night urgent care runs. Order your kids' emergency kit today and remove panic from your life. And if 1 or 2 of the prescriptions run out, there's a replenishment option to restock only what you need. Go to dailyclouthealth.com and grab your kids' emergency kit right now. Use code DailyClout to save up to $40 at checkout. These kits are only available in the USA. Thank you. And she said we no longer have pharmaceutical manufacturing and that all of our pharmaceuticals come from China. And we talked about what a national security risk that is. And I can imagine that many things, including, food imports and mechanical imports and car imports, if we're importing them all from our enemies, or a vast majority of them, that can so easily turn into a national security risk as well as an economic risk. I mean, I know it's not your job to kind of tease that out, but
the answer is absolutely yes. And economics ties into national security for sure. We saw it, right? We're talking about the Ukraine war. There was a period of time where we couldn't get the chips to send more Javelin anti-tank missiles to Ukraine. We couldn't do it because of supply chain issues. That's
right.
A national security threat, clearly. General Mullen referred to the national debt as being a national security risk, being beholden to foreign creditors and other things. So economics certainly ties into geopolitics.
So if our debt is, I'm so sorry, I'm going to do that again because someone is walking.
I have two, of course. If our debt, sorry. I'm dog crazy. I will be quiet for dogs always. Anyway.
If our debt is held by foreigners who could turn out to be adversarial to us, and our supply chain is held by foreigners who could turn out to be adversarial to us, then literally tomorrow, I am so sorry.
Right.
Darling, are we all set? Can I repeat that? And
give me just a second to shut this up.
Okay. Sorry, my apologies.
Right.
Okay. Yes, Brian says hello. Okay, are we all set? I'll indicate the cut. Okay. Is there going to be one more thing when you walk out the door, honey?
No, actually.
All right, great. No more electronic disruption. All right, that's 1551. If our debt is held by foreigners who could become adversarial and our supply chain is held by foreigners who could become adversarial, theoretically, I mean, the national security part of the economy is so fascinating. Theoretically, couldn't China tomorrow call in our debt and, just like a bank or if you're leveraged with a brokerage firm, they can call in the margin and kind of cripple you? I mean, couldn't that be done to us economically by our adversaries?
It could, and that's been the case for a long time, but the relationship is mutually beneficial. We could cripple China too, right? Trump puts 100% tariffs on goods coming from China. That's going to have a big effect on China's economy. So it's kind of this idea of almost mutually assured
destruction. Right. But when you've got that kind of arrangement or that kind of relationship, then when someone rattles that relationship like Trump is threatening to do, couldn't China rattle back by starting to call in a bunch of debt to scare him, just like he would scare them?
Absolutely. Look at the BRICS, right? This is what it's designed to do, to reduce the dollar's share of international trade. In doing so, you reduce the dollar's strength, global importance, and over time, you reduce your reliance on the dollar. And then when you do, that's when you act. And that's what's happening. And Trump has made it a priority. He's addressed the BRICS on Truth Social. It's an aggressive stance. It's an interesting one. That will be interesting to see how that shapes out.
How has he addressed the BRICS on Truth Social? And just to remind everyone who may not remember from our last conversation, just define what BRICS is, please, again.
Yes, since then, he sent out a tweet. It was an aggressive stance, and it was basically saying, look, if you want to move away from the US dollar, we're going to impose 100% tariffs. Anyone that moves from a dollar-based system. It was very aggressive wording. Actually, Steve Bannon sent me the screenshot of the text. He caught it obviously before I did.
Wow.
It's the right rhetoric, but I have some concerns. Look, there's a couple of reasons that the world is moving away from the dollar, which we've discussed. One is devaluation, and the other is weaponization, right? Ultimately, using essentially our currency or our trade as a threat reinforces to a degree the idea that the dollar is a yoke and that other nations may be better off not wearing it. So I think the stick is important. And like I say, if it's a negotiating tactic, I think it's a good starting point, but we will need carrots longer term along with sticks. And I think carrots will come in the form of a stable US dollar, because if we don't have that, then I don't see it.
We have no leverage at all. Good Lord. Well, I mean, the good news is he is the great negotiator. So hopefully he's, he's thinking along the same lines you are, and it's not just belligerent, which can be so destabilizing economically.
The problem that he has, and he is, and if we were a dictatorship, I would be much more hopeful right now. Well, not the concern is that he's weak in these negotiations because they know in 4 years he's out, and then they have an unknown, and that these moves away, they're long term. I can't see them sort of. They went through a lot of pain to come off a dollar-based system, to re-dollarize, to then de-dollar. I just don't see it. So this is going to be an interesting one to see how it shapes out. Longer term, I still have concerns for currency.
Yeah, as you should. Well, another question before I go to my first follow-up question. This is why I love talking to you. It's like one rabbit hole leads to another rabbit hole. Each rabbit hole is, adds value to the last rabbit hole. Why is Biden, in the last kind of moments of his administration, giving away billions of dollars to random geopolitical destinations like Africa? I mean, Ukraine, I kind of get it's money laundering, but why these huge checks being written?
Because there's a lot of unspent funds that he knows will be sort of taken away if Trump gets in. He's got 6 weeks to spend the money, so spend them. These are his pork barrel projects. Let's get the money out there. This is what these guys did. We knew it was going to happen. If they lost the election, there would be massive spending, and when you have a time crunch to spend, it's almost certainly wasteful spending. So
why Africa? I mean, Brian's hypothesis is who owns Africa? It's China. So it's a way of funneling money to China. But what's your view? Why Africa?
Listen, there's a race to Africa now. I was watching, I forget which African nation, but it was the deputy treasury head, and he was meeting with a leader of an African nation. And the guy asked him, why are you coming here now? Is it because we've had so many visits from China? Is that why you're feeling the threat from China? And the response, of course, was no. But I think there's something. China are undergoing essentially a modern day colonization of Africa. Right. And I think America are not in terms of colonization, but I think they're falling behind there. And I think there's a scramble. It's not an area I'm familiar enough in to talk. That would, I think Brian's guess is better than mine and probably a good one.
It's just so notable because I don't see how a giant check to Africa, on the eve of leaving the White House helps the Democrats politically in the next election cycle. It just doesn't help, right?
Brian's right. We're worried we're losing ground in Africa. The Chinese are moving, and based on the interview I referenced, I suspect that's probably the case. That was certainly the opinion of the African leader in question.
And then what's like, we've got, I don't know, 48 days left with this administration before inauguration. What is the risk if they just like clear out the treasure house? What's the risk? I mean, these people are so unpredictable, unstable, unrestrained. What could we be looking at economically if they continue to shovel American taxpayer funds, which I don't even understand because Congress is supposed to be authorizing that. The president can just hand it over. But what are we looking at economically if they just give away, more stuff to everyone but us?
More of the same problems, more inflation, more dollar devaluation. This is, again, just more wasteful spending from the administration. I'll say this, they've been doing it for 4 years. I think over a 6-week period, the damage has largely been done at this point. It's all going to boil down to what Trump, what Doge, what Besant do. That's going to be key, but it's going to be impossible to stop the spending. In Trump's first quarter, I think the Treasury already is spending $824 billion, which is the most for any quarter ever in history. It's a tough job he's walking into. If I was Trump, I wouldn't have done it. I mean, he did 2016 to 2020. He left an amazing economy. He's inherited an absolute disaster. The guy's a patriot, clearly.
Yeah. I can't believe I'm at a stage in my life in which I'm agreeing with you enthusiastically, but yes.
By the way, me too. I'm a bleeding Democrat for most of my life.
Really? I did not know that about you, Mr. Patrick.
In England, if you're a Republican, you're a Democrat over here. So I was fiscally conservative always, but who was it? Benjamin Disraeli said, if you're not a liberal when you're when you're young, you have no heart. But if you're not a conservative when you're older, you have no head. And that stuck with me.
Right. Well, now I will finally get to my second follow-up question, which is Scott Bessent. Disclosure, I believe he was involved in a publishing house that published me, but he is why don't you describe what he is and why you're happy about him? He seems to be an uncontroversial pick. People seem pretty cheerful about Scott Bessent.
Listen, yeah, and the markets responded very positively to Bessent. Listen, he's a Wall Street guy. He's a market guy. He worked for Soros's hedge fund for many years. Was very successful. Understands the international banking system very well. He's the guy if we need to refinance debt. I mean, Yellen was essentially professional economist, a bureaucrat. This is a business guy. This is a Wall Street guy, and this is what we need at the moment. His priority is to work on deficit and the national debt, and we just need a serious man at the helm. Yellen was an absolute disaster under her stewardship. I mean, it's just been a mess. So I'm excited for Bessent generally. But like I said, he's got a tough job. And that's why I think Doge are going to be important as well. We've got to curb the spending to give these guys a chance. And it's going to be difficult. But it's exciting.
Let's talk about that. So by Doge, you mean the Department of Government Efficiency, which is being run now by Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk, astonishingly, right? So that seems kind of exciting. And I get the buzziness of it. At the same time, it makes me very nervous because, they were, and I wrote an essay about this. They were kind of like, I felt like frat boys, with a giant Lego set and going, we're going to slash this, we're going to get rid of that, we're going to, close down the Department of Education. They were saying it on X, and it's like, this is not how you message anything, especially to millions of people who are government workers, and whether you like the government or not, these are people with mortgages and families, and a lot of them are your voters, right? And they're just like, woo, it's all going to shrink, But isn't there a danger there too? I mean, Elon Musk is an extraordinary person, amazing entrepreneur. He's built a lot of things, but he has zero experience in government, as I understand. And B, I don't know enough about Ramaswamy's background to know, but I'm not aware that either of these people really understand how government agencies work and how to make them smaller without things collapsing. So what's your thought about that?
Listen, I think the rhetoric has been very aggressive, but I think it is just that. I think it's rhetoric. They're getting people excited. They're sort of talking about this idea of creative destruction. Listen, governments are wasteful. They're not run well. The interesting part for me was Elon Musk starting to post on Twitter the wasteful things that governments spend on. I thought that was genius. By the way, all governments everywhere in the world spend money wastefully, right? But for people to see it, I think was a smart tactic. Look, they're talking about slashing $2 trillion. They're not going to do it. I just don't see how it's possible. You could fire every single federal employee, it'd be about $500 billion. Like, it's very lofty goals. So I think
sorry to interrupt, but isn't that kind of my point? They've never played with other people's money in this way, right?
Look, I agree. And I think, like I said, what it is at this point is rhetoric. I think once they get in, they're going to start to become a little bit more realistic. The reason I'm excited is I think there are places to cut. I think there is a lot of wasteful spending. Governments in general are not efficient at all. To have some private sector guys come in there and make cuts in the right places, I think is interesting. Like you said, it could also be very dangerous as well. But the hope is that they'll be warned off by a bureaucracy on where they can't make cuts. So again, it's interesting. I think there's a lot of stuff they can cut, a lot of stuff they're saying that they can, that they can't.
Right.
But just the fact that we have a Department of Government Efficiency.
That is good.
I think it's interesting.
That's good.
Look, nobody's been talking about this. For the last 4 years, we've been told, look, everything's fine. The national debt's fine. There's no inflation. There's no issues. Suddenly, we've got a new set of guys. They brought a bunch of private sector guys in and saying, look, we're going to look at efficiency. We have a massive problem. We have a debt problem. We have a spending problem. Just hearing this is encouraging. As they get in, I think they're going to realize it's a tougher task than they thought. And I think they'll start to adapt. At the end of the day, they're smart. They may not have the experience in government, but they have private sector experience. Musk experience at Twitter. I mean, he cut staff. They're not profitable yet. So I don't know. I'm interested.
Okay, so economically, say they fire, tens of thousands of government workers or lay them off or make them redundant. I don't even know the process. Isn't that going to negatively affect the economy? Because then you have all these unemployed people who don't have disposable money to spend and who might not be able to make their mortgages. Can we talk about, isn't that like risky?
I think so. And I don't think I think that the government's probably fat in terms of employees, but I don't think the big cuts are going to come from employees. I think the big cuts are going to come hopefully from wasteful spending.
I see.
My hope.
Right, but if they say things like, let's just close down the Department of Education, that's human beings who are, unless they move them around, right?
I mean, for me, I'm hoping that doesn't happen. I'm not sure the economic benefits are really significant enough to warrant it. I don't know enough about the Department of Education specifically to know whether we really need them or not. I would assume we did. Again, I don't know whether this is political rhetoric at this point, but for me, where the cuts need to come is wasteful spending.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I could see that would be beneficial, right? Because then you have more dollars in the treasury and the dollar is stronger. Is that what happens when you're not wastefully spending?
Yeah, but what it means, we're not running deficits or running smaller deficits, right? Which means we're The dollar is more attractive on a global scale.
Gotcha.
It strengthens the dollar, etc.
See, we get there eventually. Like I'm finally learning the algebra here of spending anything, the dollar gets stronger. Well, in our last few minutes together, of course, we always want to talk about precious metals when we talk about the economy and what the latest events are doing in that regard. So how does this change things when it comes to gold and precious metals?
I don't think it changes a great deal for the reasons we've mentioned, right? I think the fundamentals that we discussed weeks ago, they are still here today. Inflation is still very sticky. We have a Federal Reserve now that, if they view Trump's policies as inflationary, they make it, keep interest rates higher to quell inflation. So the problems we were talking about haven't disappeared. The fundamentals are still there, and precious metals perform very, very well in these climates. Like I said, the one thing I'm not that hopeful for longer term is global de-dollarization. I think we could slow it shorter term, but I think the trend will continue longer term. And with a weaker dollar means higher gold prices. So I think,
Oh, so now is the time, is what you're suggesting.
Yeah. When an investor has all of their assets denominated in one currency in a time where the dollar's strength is reducing, when the dollar's position globally is up in the air, obviously we're still the prime reserve currency. There isn't another threat yet, but that trend is continuing. And to have all of our retirement denominated in US dollars or US dollar denominated assets, I think is a risk not worth taking. And by having precious metals, what you do is you provide a hedge. As the dollar comes down in value, that portion of our portfolio will be affected. That devaluation of the dollar will drive the gold portion up. So essentially it functions as a sort of insurance on the portfolio. And I say to people all the time, we have insurance on everything. Ourselves, we need a form of insurance on our retirement. And like I said, by having everything exposed to the dollar without a hedge, I think we're lacking. And that's where.
Oh, that's such an interesting way to think of it. The gold part of one's portfolio, it kind of provides security for when it comes to the vagaries of the dollar part of one's portfolio. Is that the bottom line?
Absolutely. And look, when people are taking, let's say, a smaller percentage of their portfolio, putting it in gold, and they're leaving the balance where it is, I'll say to them, well, we hope the gold goes down. And they look at me like, what do you mean? And that's kind of the idea. If your gold's going down, that larger portion you have is going up. But that's kind of,
Oh, that is what a hedge is. You win either way. Ah, clever. That makes sense. Oh my God, I'm embarrassed. It's taken me so long to understand that. That makes really good sense. Well, Brian has one final question he wants me to make sure to ask you. He said, China recently announced a discovery of a massive gold mine. How will this impact the gold market?
I mean, listen, more supply means if demand is constant, prices go down. However, China are very unique. China do not allow the exporting of any domestic mined Chinese gold. So that will not hit international markets. That will boost China's gold reserves.
Oh, interesting. So I guess this actually means all the more reason to have our own gold, because I'm sure China is thrilled about having their gold that they're not going to let us have access to. Is that the bottom line? It's like a gold race.
It is a gold race. China, it was a huge discovery. So globally, it'll increase supply, but luckily demand is consistently increasing as well. So across the board, I think the fundamentals for precious metals today, very, very strong. I've not seen in my lifetime a better climate for them than we've seen over the last 5 years. But I think it'll continue through for another 5.
Well, thank you so much for educating us yet again. I'm I'm excited to understand each time we talk a little more about how the economy actually works. It's quite empowering. It's very easy to be an English major girl in this culture, just go, I don't understand how the economy works. It's a mystery to me. And that's not good for me or for my retirement or for my savings. So I want to thank you, girl or boy, right? There are many of us who just throw up our hands, and you make it easier to not throw up our hands, easier to really understand. So where do people follow you, and how can they support your message?
And so for me, I'm on Getter a lot. It's at Phillip Patrick on Getter, at Phillip Patrick on Getter. And I think they can text Daily Clout to 989898.
Yes, I was going to share that just as soon as you're done with where we follow you. And are you on X as well? And you're often on War Room.
I'm on War Room a lot. I'm not on X, and I'm going to set up an X. I was told Getter only for a while. That was before Elon obviously bought X, and I'm slow to respond. But at Phillip Patrick on Getter for now.
Fantastic. And for all of you who are Daily Clout readers and supporters, you really should do this. I did it, and I have a lovely guy named Corey who's chatting with me about adding more to our gold account with Birch Gold. And so what you do is you text the word Daily Clout to 989898, and a lovely, helpful, very chill person, like not stressy, from Birch Gold will contact you and answer all your questions, which is another reason I love this partnership. I love this gold company. We've investigated a number of them, and I had reservations about a number of them. These people are absolutely transparent, accountable. They have so many Better Business Bureau super high ratings, and they will, and there's nothing hidden, which I adore. So text Daily Clout to 989898. We're going to let you go, but can't wait to talk to you again. And thank you for sharing your knowledge and your expertise with us, Mr. Patrick.
Thank you so much for having me.
Take care.